Joining us now is former U.S. Attorney and senior FBI official Chuck Rosenberg, who is, we talk about this document, and it leads one to focus on the fact, perhaps, that this document we're talking about is not in Mar-a-Lago. This is a document that potentially Trump was waving around in Bedminster, which is in New Jersey. Now, at a point, folks were asking, well, when is that property going to get searched? And the conclusion was that there was not probable cause to search those properties. Do you think this at all establishes probable cause to search Bedminster?
I don't, and let me explain that. So you need probable cause, which comes directly from the Fourth Amendment, to do two things. One, you have to demonstrate to a judge that there's probable cause to believe a crime has been committed, and two, just as important, that you're going to find evidence of the crime at the place you search. There is a doctrine within Fourth Amendment jurisprudence called staleness. If the information you have about the thing you're looking for is old, right? He allegedly waved around this document in July of 2021, almost 2 years ago, then your probable cause would be stale. You wouldn't be able to convince a judge, nor should you try to sign a search warrant if the only thing you have tying that evidence to that house is 2 years old. So the Department of Justice did exactly the right thing, Alex. They issued a grand jury subpoena for the document. If it exists, then it's incumbent on the lawyers to turn it over. And if it doesn't exist, maybe we find it somewhere else. But no, I don't think there would be probable cause today to search Bedminster, not at least on that basis.
Can we talk about the recording itself for a moment? Because, I'm not sure that anybody can say at this juncture publicly where it came from, but the New York Times seems to offer a thinly veiled suggestion that maybe Mark Meadows has something to do with it. And Mark Meadows, as of right now, is a person for whom the Trump campaign says it hasn't heard from in a while. This used to be the president's chief of staff. We have some reporting that suggests the Trump campaign or the Trump PAC may have been paying Mark Meadows legal bills. And now all of a sudden, no one's heard from him. And there's a very explosive piece of potential evidence that may have come from Mark Meadows. How are you reading the tea leaves as it concerns Mark Meadows and whether or not he might be a cooperating witness at this point?
Well, he would certainly be an important witness. He was the president's chief of staff at the end of the Trump presidency. He was around him all the time. He had proximity. He would have spoken to him and heard what he was saying and knew what he was thinking. So he's an important witness. Whether or not he provided that recording, I don't know. Perhaps we'll find out one day, but it doesn't matter. There's a lot of ways through the federal rules of evidence, and I promise not to get too nerdy here on you, Alex, to show that the recording is authentic. Anybody else who was in the room who could identify Mr. Trump's voice, who knew that a recording was being made, could authenticate it. That part is easy. And you don't necessarily need Mark Meadows to authenticate the recording. He might be able to, but there are other ways to do it, of course. What Meadows is important for, as I articulated, at least I hope I articulated it, is the fact that he had proximity to the president and would have known what he was saying and what he was thinking. The fact that the Trump camp has not heard from him may suggest that Meadows is cooperating. I would imagine that if Meadows had a good attorney, he or she would tell him, don't talk publicly about anything you might testify to. Keep your thoughts to yourself. There'll be a time and a place for it down the road.
Chuck, how do you square the tape that we have of Donald Trump and his statements when he speaks to people like Sean Hannity, and specifically his statements to Sean Hannity? I mean, what does this suggest to you about Trump as a sort of reliable narrator, both, to his lawyers and then as a potential witness in all of this?
Yeah, so in a shocking development, Alex, he's not terribly reliable.
Yeah.
I don't put much stock into what he says on television. That said, he may never be a witness in his own case, right? He has the absolute right under the Fifth Amendment to not testify, to not present any defense. And I imagine, by the way, prosecutors would be salivating to use all of those extraneous statements he makes all over the place to cross-examine him. So not reliable, not somebody who ought to get on the stand and testify in his own defense. If we get to that point and he chooses to do so, the cross-examination would be worth the price of admission.
Well, yes, that's an understatement.